Tridi Kamala Shane Bajatara Charana Deko Shantamone Premonayani Aparupa Priya Darshana Aparupa Priya Darshana.
Namaste, Babaji.
Namaste, Anurag.
This is part 2 of our interview, and thanks again for meeting with us like this. At the end of our last conversation, we stopped. We were talking about the Divine Mother, who, of course, is a vast and endless subject. So I thought we'd immediately dive into the deep end of the pool and talk about Holy Mother. And I remember my first retreat, we were on a break, and the students were a little rowdy, and you gave us a gentle scolding, and then talked about reverence and talked about Holy Mother, and you started tearing up about Holy Mother, and it was really stunning to me to see how she moved you like that. So it made me wonder, who is this woman, and what does she mean to you? So can you talk a little bit about Holy Mother and who she is and her relevance for the West and how she's affected your life?
That is a deep subject, going right to the heart of the matter, really. Maybe for the viewers, we should make that distinction between Divine Mother of the Universe and Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi, who was Sri Ramakrishna's divine consort and wife, and also whom he passed on the whole Ramakrishna order to, and a perfect example of womanhood, all the things that are said about her. She was my teacher's guru, Swami Vivekananda Maharaj, who is here in Portland, Oregon, where we're sitting right now in my own ashram. His ashram was just a few blocks away up the hill there, and he used to tear up when he spoke about her. He would speak about her very little, but when we got the outright temerity to bring her up in his presence, when he wasn't just speaking Advaita or non-duality with a kind of a lion's roar type of atmosphere, then somebody would say, "Can you speak about Holy Mother?" So he would automatically get quiet, and then he would say a few things, and then you'd see him sort of tear up in a way. He would get very affected by thinking back on her. And she gave him his initiation, and he became a lifelong monk into his 90s. He was living here in Portland. He used to say, "I've heard her voice, I've seen her face, now I long for her grace with all my heart." So all of us that had come to Swami Vivekananda, well, many of us probably had come because not only of hearing of Swami Vivekananda, whom everyone hears about in Vedanta in the West, but also through Ramakrishna, through the Gospel of Ramakrishna. But Holy Mother was a little bit more behind the scenes, and Divine Mother of the Universe, we'd probably give her a designation like Mother Kali or Durga, Sri Durga, or Saraswati, or Lakshmi, even Mahalakshmi, depending on if you're talking more of the Tantric Devi or goddess or the Vedic goddess. So Sri Ramakrishna used to call her incarnation of several of those goddesses. Beautiful songs about her even that say that, even since she's passed away, many songs have been written about her. I think she passed away in the 1920s, and so lived a long time after the Master, who passed away in, I think, 1883. So for my own part in that, I knew about her before and was curious about her before I came to Swami Vivekananda. I grew up here in Portland and went away to Hawaii for musical reasons, professional music, and came back to Oregon in knowledge of the fact that her last living monastic disciple, actually one of two, because Swami Nityaswarupananda was alive at that time, and I knew him too, and he was a great supporter of Jaima music, which is this musical side of what I do. So those two are the last living ones, and I came back and knowledge that he was here in Portland, and I had actually been born right near where he had come to teach. And so I didn't know that before I left Portland, so it was rather ironic to hear from Lex Hickson, our founder, that you should go back and see Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj because he's right there where you grew up. And up to that time in my 20s, I'd only just found out about Ramakrishna, read the gospel, and called him my guru without any formal initiation or meeting a Swami of the order even. So in my 20s, mid-20s, I came back and found him here and asked him for initiation into the mother path, what I thought of as the mother path, which is also, of course, Sri Ramakrishna's path and Swami Vivekananda's Vedanta. And so I always felt deepest about her, and of course loved them all. Eventually SRV, Sarada Ramakrishna Vivekananda, was the Association of the West, which Lex Hickson and a number of us hand-picked disciples of Ramakrishna, both older and younger at the time, some of the older old school Vedantas and some of the younger up-and-coming Vedantas, like my wife and a few other of his Swami Sheshananda's students became the founders of that organization, and they're now running it after some 20 years. So I know I'm sort of talking around the real deep emotional devotional feeling I get about her, but at least with that as a sort of qualifier, I can say that to equate her with the Divine Mother of the Universe, that she is Kali, that she is Durga, that she is Saraswati, is quite an easy thing to do once you know about her life. Put her in the modern context of what they call the Kali Yuga, or this contemporary times, and you have all the more awe and admiration for her, because in another time it might have seemed more natural to see a divinity like that on earth, but not in this time. This time is very, very dense, dark time, obviously, and if you haven't found that out yet, then probably ought to study the Four Noble Truths of Lord Buddha and get on the stick with that, because this is the Kali Yuga you're in. This is the thickest, densest Maya that people are in right now, and they need a great soul like that, or great souls like these, to lead them up and out of it. Taking a guide or an ideal, Swami Vivekananda said, is absolutely necessary, particularly in this day and age. So she's always been my deepest ideal. Being a musician, as I mentioned early on, professional musician, and playing different kinds of music, like Indian music as well as Western classical, I found her as the aspect of Saraswati, the goddess of arts and learning. I was always into sound, and sound meant to me music, but it also meant to me lectures, discourses, wisdom. She's the goddess of the word, Vak Devi. So very easily for me to see her as Saraswati. Besides, her name, Sharda, or Shardamani, is a name for Saraswati. So her parents actually named her too, in that way. Sharda means spring and other things, but it also means Sarada, it is a pool of wisdom. And Saraswati is a pool of wisdom. The Om is like an ocean of wisdom, the word. And out of that comes vibrations like intelligence. The first, as Swami Vivekananda said, the first thing out the door is intelligence from the word. It's streaming in particles. And if you can pick up on those particles, you can find yourself back to the source. So Mother guides all this process. It's her intelligence, Mother wisdom. That's the path of Shaktism in Vedanta, but you'll see in all other paths too that Vaishnavism has Sita and Radha, for instance, and Shaivism has Uma and Parvati, and so forth and so on. Even Ganesha, if you're following the path of Ganapacha, one of the 5 main sects in India, Ganesha stands at the feet of Durga, and as one of her pillars, as one of her guards. So there's a lot of things to get devotional and teary-eyed about when you begin speaking of her. What to speak of meditating on her?
I remember in a letter you wrote to me once, you said, you can never get to know Mother, but even in the attempt to know her, you get purified in the process.
That's one of Ram Prasad's beautiful songs, the Bengali poet saint, whom Sri Ramakrishna was so enamored with. And I found those songs still being sung when I went to Calcutta my first time. I've been some dozen times since to India, but yeah, that's one of the songs you could even hear played on the streets up until even the 80s, 1980s when I was there. I heard that song being sung in the street. Try to fathom the Divine Mother of the Universe. Meditate upon her holy feet. You'll never be able to do it, to fathom her, that is. But the attempt will purify your mind. So, as if to say the pure mind is God. And both Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Lord Buddha said that. Pure mind is Buddha mind, pure mind is God, in Pali and in Bengali. So in English it translates very easily too. Chit Shuddhi, they call it, the purity of mind. As if mind and brain are different, you have to realize that first. Brain functions mainly just on the physical level, but mind functions on the subtle level, on causal level. Those are called the two other bodies of mankind, and they signify the U and M of the word Om. And they also are internal worlds, or the kingdoms of heaven within, if you want to say it that way.
Have you noticed any difference in quality meditating upon Holy Mother and meditating on Sri Ramakrishna? Are there? I know they're one and the same, but are there different ways that they can purify the mind?
I think so. I mean, the devotee will take the ideal and render it into the most effective way of enlightenment for them. There's no doubt about that. It's like a thumbprint. It's a signature, spiritual signature. That's why you select an ishtam, or chosen ideal in our path. Very important. In Christianity, it would be like you get to the Father through the Son. Here we're talking about getting to the Mother through the daughter, if you will, in the mother path. But whatever the case may be, when we used to ask that question, because it came up quite often, I mean, it's one of the maybe small difficulties of having more than one ishtam. I mean, many people are confused by the different gods and goddesses. They might even go menu tasting with religions and guru fadding with spiritual teachers, faddism, and at the same time with the gods and goddesses, they have a hard time selecting. They might change it around each month. In Zen, that's called wild fox Zen. You don't want to. You want a one taste bowl. You don't want a many tastes. Right. Dig one deep well, as we say in our tradition, as you know. Anyway, along those lines, we've asked before our teachers, our gurus, should meditate on Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother. They'd often say, choose one, and realize that they're both the same. I mean, in the end, there's no real difference. But you'll find the one that appeals to you most and will bring you through that porthole, out of ignorance into living wisdom. And I mean, Sri Ramakrishna was so devoted to Mother Kali, it's hard to see him other than feminine, in a sense. He has a beard and so forth. I mean, his pictures, even his breasts are even rather enlarged. You see, like maybe that's that half man, half woman ideal that's in the Hindu tradition, and why the gods and goddesses sometimes you can't tell their gender apart. One they look half feminine, half male, or vice versa. So anyway, the idea is that, and Holy Mother said it herself. Meditating on me is the same as meditating on Sri Ramakrishna. They have the same essence. Sometimes I joke about that, excuse me, but the old commercials of the day, since we were musicians, we heard all the music and could remember everything. And I remember the candy commercial about sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Almond Joy has nuts, Mounds don't. So Sri Ramakrishna is a nut, and Holy Mother is pure nougat chocolate. Coconut, That's great. So they're both delicious for meditation. Very flavorful, and you just need to enter into them and select them as your ideal and meditate deeply on them. Same with Swami Vivekananda, I must say, although whereas Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna are more tantric, you might say, divine couple-ish. Swami Vivekananda was a solo sannyasin monk who brought the Vedanta here, and not Tantra, although he was very tantric makeup himself. I mean, that's one of the things about Shankara and his line, Govindapada and Gaudapada, that they were Samayachara tantrasists behind the scenes. They would have had to have been to worship Shiva. Shankara named himself after Shiva. But they were Advaitists in front, you know, and some people are the opposite of that. In fact, some of the saying about that in our tradition is that Sri Ramakrishna was a bhakta outside and a jnani inside, and Swami Vivekananda was the opposite.
So would you say maybe your contemplation of Swami Vivekananda is more in the field of action? Can you ascribe a quality to the effect that he's had on you? And I'd like to circle back to Holy Mother again, but I'm just going to ask that question.
Yeah, he's really the most inspirational one. The other you'd think more about faith and bhakti, but devotion, surrender, self-surrender. You know, when you think of Swami Vivekananda, you think of this noble ideal that represents non-duality or Advaita. Not that they didn't, of course, because that's the underlying of all of them, including Sri Krishna in the Gita, in my way of seeing. It's just the whole underlying thing is this thread of Advaita Vedanta that runs through it all. And they say as much in their writings and in their lives. So, but Vivekananda, basically, you lean pretty heavily towards the non-duality. It's what he wanted us to learn in the West in the time he came here, 1893, and I think 1902. He was here for maybe a year or two. And I used to say, because of that, America has its first patron saint, or a seer in this case, because we were having a hard time finding them in America. Still, we are. So Vivekananda fills that for us. And since we are intellectual, pretty heavily materialistic at the same time, and seeking after pleasure rather than wisdom quite often, generally speaking, then we need a soul like that to come amongst us and steer us back toward the divine essence inside of us, a source, if you will. Because science is heading us outward. I was thinking even in my own meditation today that here I am, in meditation, sitting here in the altar, in the shrine, meditating, and the body with all its nerves, its hundreds and thousands of nerves, that's the internal side of my external body. And that's what science is doing with the atom and so forth. They're taking what's inside the external form and studying that. But nobody's going to the inside of the inside. Like you go to the mind and there's its thoughts, and you go to the thoughts and there's its intelligence. If you want to put that in terms of bhakti, Sri Ramakrishna used to say it good. There's the body, then there's the bones, and then there's the marrow of the bones. He's talking about external bhakti, internal bhakti, and the essence, prema bhakti. The marrow would be the internal essence. So those are just mentions aside along that same line.
I would think that there's a certain amount of fearlessness, of course, which Swamiji embodied to do that involution process, to go deeper and deeper inside.
Abhaya.
The first book I read about Sri Ramakrishna was in my early 20s. And I remember a particular section, one of the first things I read about him, and Holy Mother asked him, "How do you see me?" And he said, "Verily I see you as the Divine Mother herself." And as a 20-year-old, that just blew my mind. It's like to see a woman as divinity, which seems very relevant for our age. And as a spiritual teacher, you're always talking to students about, or they're asking you about relationships. How do you navigate that? So what relevance do you see in their relationship, and what can we learn from that?
Well, the Ramakrishna order always posits them or poses them as the divine couple. They're monks, so an ideal for them would be brahmacharya. They think brahmacharya is, even if you're a yogi householder with a wife and dharmic children, then the idea of brahmacharya is important. It's kind of hard to look at the West and find that. Maybe even back in the 50s and 60s when we were growing up, we had some sort of idea of keeping our children chaste. That's pretty much gone to the four winds now. Let them have their experiences and so forth. It's all in Maya, so there's no winner there. You know, it's just like, we hope this all works out for everyone, you know.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, we have compassion for you, right? And we'll try and help you. But back to the ideal of brahmacharya, even the yogis who are householders would follow that path. And practitioners will follow it. This doesn't mean like you need to be brahmacharya your whole life. That's for a monk or for a student, you know, to collect your prana. Prana is one of the missing elements, according to Vivekananda, amongst us. We haven't got control of our prana. It's either outward, number one, outward going only, and number two, we don't know what it is. When Jesus said, man does not live by bread alone, he's not talking about the body, nor is he talking about God, Almighty Father. He's talking about prana. You live by prana. You breathe by prana. You see by prana. You think by prana. I speak by prana. You understand what I'm saying by prana. It's so important. And when you take the prana to the psychic level, you're not at the outside prana anymore, that people are barely grazing the surface of prana when they just relegate it to flow of blood and even the breathing exercise. It's what the breathing exercise represents that you want to start meditating on, and that will take you into your mind, and termed psychic prana. Vivekananda brought that to our attention. So that's very important to get a hold of, as you're just saying, and it's one of the missing links. So that is also been, you know, connected with brahmacharya. I mean, the sexual energy isn't the only thing you have to convert into ojas and bring up the spine. If you try and do that before you eat pure food, before you breathe properly, before you sit properly, then it can cause problems.
Now, what do you see, in particular in the marriages that you see amongst the Westerners, how that maybe is a detriment to spiritual life, and how can it be an aid to spiritual life? And it's really wonderful for your students, because you're a spiritual teacher, but you're not a monk, and you're not in the world, but you have certain experiences where we can relate to you and you can relate to us. You've been married about 40 years now, I think, almost 40 years.
At teaching?
No, 40 years you've been married for.
Oh, yes, since '79.
Okay, to your wonderful wife, Loke.
Yes.
So can you speak a little bit about what you've learned in your own marriage, without, in terms of the challenges that we face as Westerners, and how we can get through it, and how you got through certain things, and what your ideal is in relationship, and how you've gone through that? Because it's really wonderful to see how you two serve each other, and I'm sure it was a very complex, winding road to get to where you are now.
It was a complex and winding road to find her, to find any woman that's worthy of marriage. And I'm sure it's the same for a woman trying to look for a worthy man. I mean, basically we go and find our mates in a bar nowadays, or somewhere that's worldly. And finding them in a church doesn't mean that you're going to last either. Because Vivekananda used to say it's good to be born in a church, but don't die in one. Because that's conventional religion you're talking about there. It's not living spirituality yet. It's a good start, but you need to move on and don't get caught in that net of convention. Is on all levels. It's the conventional family, it's a conventional job, and it's conventional religion. I mean, that's across the board. Good to realize that. As far as myself not being a monk nor a householder, I mean, I never owned land or had children. I often just call if people ask me, what are you, a monk or householder? I say, I'm a creamsicle. Because I'm half, white and half orange. I have the Swami color on top and the Brahmacharya color down below. So, by way of humor, but basically there's a word for it in India called vanaprasthan. There's people who live on the fringes of society and haven't given it up completely, but work from the outside. It's a very beautiful thing. Whether it's a good or a bad thing, I don't know, but I've never voted. And people come up to me on the street and hand me pamphlets or say, who are you voting for, and so forth. But, I've always just lived on grant unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and take unto yourself what is the Lord. And I take that rather seriously. I'd rather work on the outside of these systems and try and bring good into them. It's always been the way that I've been most effective.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, it's all Mayic, so there's really, you're laboring under a delusion if you think you can make any real change at all. You know, I mean, the world is change. Maya is change, and you're trying to change the mistress of change. It's not going to work. She's always got you. She's always steps ahead of you. I like what Ramakrishna says, never study Maya up close, draw back and observe it from a distance. I think that's a beautiful way of saying it. Detachment. If renunciation isn't quite your cup of tea, then detach from the situation. And that means also from the worst possible problem right now in the West, emotionalism. You see, shobha. You want ashobha in Sanskrit. You want to be non-emotional. Doesn't mean callous or without love or any of those interpretations it might get from people who don't have deep understanding. It just means peace of mind, basically. You get back deeper. Well, anyway, all of that applies to the divine couple, if you can find them. If you can find her or him, you know, you may have to go through a few experiences. It's, you know, dating. I mean, that happens too in spiritual life. You date gurus, as it were. You find there's a little bit of that allowed, unless you're very fortunate and you just come into life and you just pick up the thread of your yoga, as Krishna says, and the guru is standing right there and the path is right there and you follow the thread of your yoga. That's very beautiful. I've seen people who've done that. Just everything is just waiting for them to continue on. Other people have this long period of waiting or casting about. But when you finally do find that right partner, dharmic partner, then it's very natural and very assured that you'll make spiritual progress together. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to say, if a wife and husband agree religiously, then much progress can be made. But if they're on different paths, then it's quite likely that they're not going to agree and they won't last. And of course, we're seeing that all the time in the West. Among those who are religious or spiritually minded, there are many who aren't. Those are the difference between dharma and adharma. Then has to be brought in. What are we doing as a culture that's truly good for everyone? Like Krishna says, loka sangraha. I don't have anything to attain. I'm just here for the betterment of the worlds. The worlds mean people, basically, because people's minds have manufactured the worlds. You know, it's sankalpa that's going on there, by desire, even at a high level like the Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So in that case, it's just, is the desire dark and base? Is it very restless? Or is it sattvic, balanced? You know, is it controlled? So if you find a woman or a man that their passions are controlled and they're interested in deeper things, then you can be pretty sure that you'll make spiritual progress. And in America and in the Kali Yuga, as we were just talking about right now, it's very rare to find it. You have to put yourself in the atmosphere of people who are seeking. You can't go to a bar, or to, like I say, maybe even to a church, although that might definitely be a better place, or on the streets, or at a party, you know, where people obviously are exercising their desires. They're trying to fulfill something that will never be fulfilled. My teacher used to say, give a lecture every year, once a year, satiation never comes. And in that lecture he would say, the West is following the Bhoga Marga, path of enjoyment. That will not lead you anywhere. You must follow the Jnana Marga, the path of wisdom. So if you learn that objects won't satisfy you because they're empty of substance. They came out of your own mind, for one thing, so they're just projections. And on the other hand, if you learn that they're unable to satisfy your desires, they get stolen, they decay, they get lost, you get bored with them. There are many reasons why the object won't fulfill you.
I suppose one of the great transformations in the relationship is not wanting to get something from that object, but rather than transforming that into service.
No, that's beautiful, yeah. The path of action is also being misused. It's not just a path of devotion and love and those things that are being misunderstood, but if you could bring in that element of action, you'd have a sort of key there, because your selfishness would disappear and selflessness would come forward in you, and people would like that. See, you have to make yourself presentable to a potential mate. We call that Shiva and Shakti relationship in Tantra. The man must be a Shiva, and the woman must be Shakti. Swami Vivekananda used to say that all the time, even in the context of Vedanta, not just Tantra, that Shiva and Shakti relationship is there and to be utilized.
That's really beautiful what you said about making yourself presentable. And I remember when an early conversation we had, I was very struck by something you said. I think you were talking about Lex a little bit, and then you said you were talking about yourself as a young man, saying, "I decided I wanted to be deep and wide," and which is that's sort of like a mental posture. We'll talk about Manasana, which is all about this book that you wrote about the art of mental posture. What does it mean? To you, what makes a person deep and wide? And what did that mean to you at the time? What was your vision for becoming that person who would be deep and wide?
Well, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda epitomized that. One word saying for it would be universality or universalism. That's different than eclecticism. It's different than agnosticism, and it's definitely different than dualism or fundamentalism or secularism or materialism. It runs more, you get the non-dual essence of it, and you see the non-dual essences everywhere, and you become universal-minded. Well, Swami Vivekananda used to say that when there's a high mountain plains lake, and there's actually one here in Oregon called Silver Lake. I've walked out like half a mile into it. It never gets above your knees, you see. So it's wide but shallow. So that's eclecticism. Basically, I love all paths, but oops, I haven't practiced even one of them, you see. So you're kind of, a nice person with an open mind. But Swami Vivekananda says that high mountain lake, there's some sort of a canyon somewhere at the border of it, and the water will start flowing out of that and rush down a narrow canyon. And that's fundamentalism or dualism. I mean, it's almost natural that people have to become very focused, even to the exclusion of everything else, in order for them to get deep. So you wouldn't necessarily criticize the fundamentalists or the dualists or damn them. You may criticize them somewhere if they get stuck somewhere. But basically, that flow is then eventually going to get to this other canyon that has a big plateau or plains, and you get this lake that's both wide and deep. So I think that's just Vivekananda's paraphrasing him. That's how he saw people going to get deep like that. So things like that, if you hear them in Vedanta and apply them to your own life, then basically you'll have that desire for universal mind, wide open mind that's also deep, and you see it in them. You want it for yourself. You admire that.
So when you made that decision, what did you go about doing?
I never was a narrow person. There can be a kind of narrowness ascribed to my devotion to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. And when I found them, it was like finding the only thing I wanted. So that's called ishtanishta, one-pointed devotion to your ideal. That's necessary. But if your ideal is wide and deep, then you must be also wide and deep. You can't suffer narrowness. And Lex Sixon, our founder, once said that to me. I said, I just love Sri Ramakrishna, and I love him, first and foremost and everything. And I can't, but I don't feel like I'm at all narrow against other paths or anything. And he said, that's because Sri Ramakrishna is your Ishtam. You can't be that way because he was wide and deep. I once went up to a Swami. He passed last year, Swami Damodaranandaji Maharaj. In Fiji he was at the time, and I was in Hawaii, and he came through Hawaii, gave a talk at the Vedanta Society there with Mr. and Mrs. Morosi, who are long past now. who were running the center, sub-center it was, and he invited me to go to Fiji. So I went there twice to see him. And one time I arrived there, and I remember saying in his ashram, saying to him, "Now everywhere I go around the world," because I had been touring with Jaima Music, which is this ensemble, sacred arts ensemble I called it, with an Indian dancer and tuba player, and bhajans and stotrams to sing. It wasn't so kirtan based as they are nowadays, but it was based in these classical religious musical pieces in India. So I said, I've been everywhere around the United States and other parts of the world playing this music and talking to people, and everywhere I go, everyone accepts Ramakrishna. And Swami Damodarananda just looked at me and said, "That's because they have to. He's the universal mind among us." Avatar of Adhishtaya, that represents the best of all avatars. And if you look back to Rama and Krishna and Buddha, if you could say, and Jesus, if you could say, and so forth, then these beings all had wide open universal minds. They weren't narrow, they weren't fundamentalist. There was no Christianity when Christ walked the world. There were these deep souls. They were like sannyasin-like souls, free souls, who saw all beings and all worlds and inside and out with the single eye of truth. If thine eye be single, you shall know the truth. And therefore couldn't judge, couldn't find fault, and couldn't damn, and just saw the same reality existing in all beings, only at different levels of realization, that's all. Delimited by the vehicle or by the mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, needless to say, it's you are deep and you are wide. And I'm thinking of the story in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna now, where it's a story where he tells somebody to go further. Could you tell that story? And is there, when you think about go further in terms of yourself, can you talk about what that might look like to you? Yes,
a man was a woodcutter, I think, and he went into the woods every day, and like in Jain faction, the Jains, they'll just take just what they need and no more. And they'll be very careful not to kill anything. Well, of course, the woodsman's going to kill trees, but so Jain wouldn't be doing that. But in Jain-like fashion, the man went into the forest, took a few branches maybe and some wood, cut some things, went and sold it in the marketplace every day. So one day he was there, and behind this big tree he was about to cut branches off of, let's say, this wise man just all of a sudden came forth and said, "Go forward," and walked away. And it startled him, and it was his only encounter. It was like a 2-word mantra or 2-word instructions from this illumined soul. So it haunted him all night. And he went into the forest next day and cut his wood, and he said, "Well, the man did say, go forward." So he took a few more steps, and he went deeper into the forest that day and found a whole grove of sandalwood trees. So he took some of those branches and made much more money, much more, and to make incense to worship the goddess with, you see. Next day, he went to that sandalwood forest and, was there making his living. And he said, "But the man did say go forward." So he went deeper and found a silver mine. Next day, a gold mine, then a diamond mine. So how that, you said, asked me the question, how that proceeds to me, with difficulty in the West.
Well, I think you've already found the diamond mine, so where do you go?
Well, Diamond Cutter Sutra, I suppose you would go then. Make sure you polish that diamond if you find it, which, we're all doing. But I think that in a westernized culture, which is admittedly materialistic and which has very little jnana, it's more of a faith-based tradition, if at all, like Christianity and Judaism, if it's authentic and not messed with. And there's very little wisdom in it. Very hard to find any. So that's why a lot of us are going towards India and China, and Zen and Japan to find some wisdom in it. You see, because that's the 2 wings of the bird. My teacher said, bhakti and jnana, devotion and wisdom, they go together nicely. So inside of that context, then, I was having a difficult time. And when I was 20, 19 really, I found the Vedanta and Vivekananda and Ramakrishna, and found out that there was a word that the ancient seers, rishis in India they're called, had coined for everything that bothers you, everything that impedes you, everything that covers your vision, Maya, the queen of all four-letter words, if you get my gist. So when I found that, it was freeing, that I knew that someone else had suffered that same things that I was suffering as a teenager. I mean, I would say I had suicidal thoughts. I don't think I ever thought I would act on them. But I was also quite depressed unless I was outside in the forest or playing some sports or something like that. Shankar says, when I was a baby, I was attached to my mother's breast. When I was a young boy, I was attached to sports. When I was a young man, I was attached to a young woman. When I was old, I was attached to anxiety, because death was coming. But alas, to the Supreme Brahman, I was never attached. You see, beautiful. Bhaja Govindam. A devotional hymn with wisdom teachings in it. I mean, there you have the two wings of the bird. So, I had that kind of problem growing up. First there was upbringing, and my parents were moral, but not dharmic. I always make that distinction. They couldn't give me the wisdom teachings, but they could teach me how to be straight, be a straight shooter. And then I had society all around me. I had a school that was not teaching anything but secularism, and some of that questionable, whether it would benefit me in my life. I had politics and business, which we always had to deal with, and the hypocrisy of that. I had the military on my tail, wanting to draft me to commit acts I didn't want to do because I was nonviolent. I mean, I can go on and on here, folks.
Well, you mentioned that a great phrase you used in our last talk is, you said, I had to pay my debt to family and society. And so that's what you're talking about,
right?
Paying that debt.
The 19 years of it.
Yeah.
And at 20, found that thread of yoga. I mean, immediate vegetarian, which I couldn't do in my family, canned food and meat, immediately found the scriptures of India, the revealed scriptures of India, and started studying them at 20. Interested in yoga, began to correct my posture, worked on my breathing, and the yamas and niyamas, 5 of each in yoga, classic yoga, not hatha. And so all of that was what was waiting for me. And in that period, probably of interest to people and connected with our earlier conversation, I found 2 women, and both of them were not worthy for a lifetime relationship.
Mm-hmm.
One of them left me for my best friend. Classic. I could have written a pop song about it, you see. And one of them was older than I was and taught me some things, wisdom-wise, but wasn't herself in any shape to maintain a relationship. So I had all that to go through too, like most of us in the world today have gone through things like that. But the third woman I found was my wife for the last, since 1979, a person who was as good as gold and interested in the Dharma. In fact, I met her at a Zendo. When Lex and I, our founder Lex Dixon, we went there to the Diamond Zendo at the time with Aiken Roshi, was holding Zazen in Honolulu, as we were in Hawaii. And that's, I think, the first time I saw my wife there. So my brother laughs and jokes to me, "Oh, you got your wife in a nunnery, a Zendo, You cheated," as it were. But no, that's just what I was saying. Go to a holy place and meet people there. And this will be very good for your forward-moving life. And it'll put Maya, it'll get thee behind me, is what Jesus said. Right. All those things that are Maya. It's not an incarnate devil with a pitchfork and a tail. That's superstition. What you want is those devilish things that you yourself have created, and you want them behind you. So get them behind you. Like my depression when I was a teenager, and and my difficulties with society and military and all that. Get those behind you and set your foot forward. Lord Buddha used to say, best thing is to live alone. He would say that, being a monk and so forth, or an arhat. But if you can't do that, then find a worthy person and live with them in peace. And basically, that's from the Dhammapada. So, good advice. And I think Christ said something the same, like, it's better to marry than to burn. So if you have desires, then you should work those out. But you cannot work desires out in an adharmic atmosphere. The people don't understand that. You have to take it into a dharmic atmosphere, and then they will get worked out. There is a way of satisfying desires, but the greater percentage of people do not know about the Dharma.
As a spiritual teacher now, if you had your 16-year-old self with his depression and suicidal thoughts in front of you right now, what would you tell him?
I'd say in about 4 years you'll find the truth, and if you practice it for about 20, you'll never know what depression is ever again, and you'll never be bored. And I can attest to that, since I'm in my mid-20s, I left all that behind and I never felt it again. And it's not a boast, it's just a fact. And people can attest to that, my students. And peace of mind is what you need first and foremost. That's actually Holy Mother's saying. She said, you need peace of mind first and foremost. Because you can't gain anything of value and of long-lasting nature if you don't have peace of mind, because you won't be able to hold it. So that would be contentment, which is beyond happiness. Contentment would be the next plateau after happiness. And then after contentment would be peace of mind, and then the peace that passeth all understanding. So I would say that's probably a good short version of an explanation for that.
And say, moving ahead 7 years, your 23-year-old self, he's already got some illumination, still needs to go further. What would you say to him at that age?
Good questions, Anurag. Making me think even. What I tell my students nowadays, give it 5 years, and if at that time it doesn't work, come to me and tell me about it. Of course, you should be consulting your spiritual guide all along the way, but there are so many people I've seen that will give it up after a year or two. And there's some dynamics to this. In our tradition, we get mantra, called mantra diksha. Diksha is initiation into the path, with instructions about meditation with the mantra. In Ramakrishna order, it's both with form and beyond form. It's not one or the other, which is a very good advantage for a country like this. So what you want to do then is have a teacher, and I heard Kala Rinpoche tell us this in the Tibet tradition, and my own Tibetan teacher, the Karmapa, and Junggang Khantrul Rinpoche, because this is the thrice blessed day after tomorrow. We're sitting here 2 days before the Buddha's birthday. We'll be giving a teaching on Tibetan Buddhism, and I just finished a series on Zen. This is all India to me. I don't consider Buddhism its own religion. This is an Indian religion. It went to Japan and China and so forth, but you can't take India out of Buddhism. He was a Buddhist. He was an Indian man. So I would say that if I heard these great teachers say that take this mantra and speak it audibly or inaudibly or silently, and then if everything goes along okay, fine, you're going to make appreciable progress. But if everything falls apart, that's a good sign, because it means the mantra is doing its work. People think that maybe they get a mantra or something and it's all going to be bliss and love and light. But they have these karmas and samskaras back inside of them. And these will be brought to the surface with something as powerful as the mantra. You don't want those things to come to the surface in a bad marriage, or a marriage that's trying to be good, or in a family that's adharmic. And this is what's happening to people, or in the military or somewhere else, out there. You have these karmas come to the surface all of a sudden, usually by some challenge or some trial or some war you're in, or some horrible thing that you have to deal with. That's not the time to deal with them. So the mantra will bring it up right there in the atmosphere of holy company, sadhu, satsanga. It's one of the 4 great sentinels, according to Lord Vashishta. So if that's the case, then these people have given up the path after 2 or 3 years, like my 23-year-old self, if I had have said, well, that's enough, I can't take any more. But my guru had have been there and said, no, keep going. This is what happens. The mantra brings up, is scrubbing bubbles for the mind that brings up these impurities in the right atmosphere so you can pop those bubbles and scour that. See, and then all of a sudden the sailing gets better. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sailor puts out, hits a storm 5 miles offshore, has to bail for his life, take down the sail and everything. That's that early period. But then he manages to get through that, clear skies come, he puts the compass and the rudder on automatic, trims the sail, sits back with a pipe and watches the stars. It's Ramakrishna's, another one of his stories. And he's really describing that period of difficulty that will happen when you take up a mantra and a serious practice. You have to get that purification period accomplished and not give up in the interim. So that's what I would have told your 23-year-old self.
If you'll indulge me one more time, your 30-year-old self, what does Babaji tell him?
30-year-old self is singing bhajans and going around the world sharing these wisdoms, cutting myself in the image of a spiritual teacher. Always had a lot to say, didn't know how to say it, was always very quiet when I was young. But it then comes the time to express it. And at that point I would say, be careful of the spiritual ego. I'd probably say that to others because I didn't never feel like it was a threat to me. I always had self-surrender to my ideal and devotion to them, and the knowledge that although I was gaining great ground in the path of Jnana Yoga, that I still knew nothing. There's just too much to know. But again, if you try and know it all, then it purifies the mind. It's that song you were just quoting with Ramprasad. You must attempt to do this and give it your best and your all, and then be satisfied with the little tiny bit that gets condensed that is your own wisdom. It's like meditation and samadhi. Spiritual experiences. I mean, people are putting those in brochures now, like, oh, I've had Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I think it's ridiculous. My students, some of them early have come up and said, oh, I've already had that Samadhi. I said, no, you haven't. So you're my student now, and I'm telling you, you have not had that Samadhi. You would not be writing brochures if you had. Just study Sri Ramakrishna's life. He wasn't putting out brochures. He wasn't even writing spiritual books. He was in another state altogether. Mother Kali had taken over. So basically one needs to be very careful about the spiritual ego and its insinuations and just move on with humility. And but with it's a strange combination of humility and forthrightness. You can't have false humility either. As Swami Vivekananda used to criticize that about people. Oh, you're saying I can't do it, or I'm nobody. But he said, if not you, who? If not now, when? He would say. So don't have false humility about it. That's as bad as pride.
Right. Yeah, it's wonderful to see that humility come out when, particularly when at the summer retreat, you're just like a teenager with the other teenagers. I mean, it's remarkable the transition from spiritual teacher to kid in the river. I wanted to ask you too about what do you notice about the teenagers? We have a contingent of teenagers who are among your students, and of course it's a perilous time navigating through Maya. What is that experience like for you to have these teenagers as your students?
Well, of course, I love my older students because quite often they're qualified and ready, and in some state of decent health to be able to practice. Swami Vivekananda used to say you have to be healthy, your body has to be healthy, and you have to have a more or less pure mind, basically, or else spiritual practice could even go sour on you. If you're trying to raise the Kundalini, for instance, and the centers aren't pure, then you're dragging all sorts of things up in, I say up, up the spine, and those very same things are coming down as problems. So in the case of the youth, if you catch them, they're impressionable. If you catch them early, especially in this society, then you can get them maybe before these samskaras. It's a very powerful word in Sanskrit. It means impressions of the mind, not just complexes that the psychotherapists talk about, but these are samskaras which are impressions from past lifetimes. We're not considering that, and Freud or Jung did not consider that either. So in Indian philosophy, particularly yoga philosophy, psychology, yoga psychology, you have knowledge about this when you raise your children. That's what a dharmic family is being aware of these subtle dynamics. Can't, otherwise it's just, you're trying to help them after the fact, after they've already made the mistake, or after the calamity from their karma has already happened to them. That's twice as hard. I call that backtracking. It's not something that you want to do. So, what was the question again?
What's it been like with the teenagers?
The teenagers of SRV and our children of SRV, we have some very beautiful teachings for them that cut to the chase kind of teachings. So that, say if we want to explain to the teenagers and even the children that the spirit and world do not mix. They just have a relationship. That much we can say, but they're not really the same. They're not of the same essence. Consciousness is sentient, nature is not, basically. And by mixing consciousness with nature, it's like trying to mix oil with water. So we make a little cylinder and we color the oil, and the oil immediately separates from the water, and you cap it off, and then you show the child, and then you shake it and say, does oil and water mix? And they say yes. They're sitting there, maybe like little yogis, But then they say, watch for 45 seconds. And then you see the separation process over 45 seconds, which hopefully for most people might take 45 lifetimes to realize this lesson. But if they can see that, then it's a very strong example of how God and mammon don't mix. They just relate. So you should associate with nature but never identify with it. I mean, these are teachings in Shankara and Vivekananda. Sri Krishna's Gita has those kinds of...
What a challenge, though, for teenagers to be hearing this, embroiled in the world of media and...
It's interesting you should say that, because the young children, I'm talking about the little ones, they almost automatically say yes. But the teenagers go, well, wait a minute, I have my job and I have my parents, and they're already into it, you see, so that's what we have to deal with them. But we're getting some very exceptional teenagers coming out of it, but very few of them. The interviews like this, YouTube classes that we're putting out, and all the things that we're trying to do to spread the Dharma and expose it to the Western countries, and around the world too, for that matter, hopefully will draw more and more people to it. Because like I said, they're not getting either contentment or satisfaction of desires or peace of mind from any of the things they're doing. And they're quite often not even keeping their nose above water. They're falling back into suffering and into confusion and scattered mind, and this is why you've got all this problem with medicines and politics and right there with the youth, autism, diabetes. I mean, you can throw all sorts of things out that would point to some external cause, but the cause is really internal. The mind first, then the body. It's always been the way India understood things. And if you can purify the mind, that's like an inner immune system. People are really big into the outer immune system and how to make that strong, but they're forgetting that the mind created the body. And it will create many bodies. God didn't create the body. Your parents didn't give you the body. These are all misnomers. You did that. And then you better get better at doing it. You see, create better bodies, healthier bodies, based on a pure mind. These are teachings that certain people really relate to. Might not be ready, everyone might not be ready to hear that the soul is not nature, but Buddha said it, Lord Patanjali, the yoga system, said it, Vedavyas and Vedanta said it, Lord Vashishta early on said it, Krishna says it in the Gita.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. We are at the end of our time again. It's flown by.
We're just
can go
getting
on.
started.
We are just getting started,
Yeah.
but we will continue hopefully. Thank you so much once again,
Yeah.
and
You're a very good questioner.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
thank you for your openness and answers.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste.